Hello and welcome back to the Retrospective series covering each and every issue of the official PlayStation magazine. This time we have issue number 5 from April of 1996. PSM always kicks off with an editor's note from Steve Jarrett, and this month's really is a look into the attitudes towards gaming in 1996. He says, "We've devoted half of our news section to one single story, the defection of Japanese software house Squaresoft to the PlayStation cause. But they make role-playing games, I hear you wail. Who gives a toss?" You see, back in 1996, gamers were still seen as nerds and outcasts really, especially in the school setting which I was in at the time. If you weren't interested in or didn't play sports, as I didn't, you were seen as probably the lowest form of nerd. But paradoxically, in Britain at least, the sports games that came out here were radically the most popular. People just couldn't get enough of racing games and football games, and to a slightly lesser extent fighting games, but RPGs, they were seen as the realm of the nerd even within gaming circles. Steve Jarrett goes on, "But this is an important event for several reasons. First of all, it heightens Japanese awareness of the machine. PlayStation has sold reasonably well in Japan, but the battle is far from over, and a new episode of the mighty Final Fantasy on PlayStation will no doubt prompt gamers to buy Sony's machine over Nintendo's." And now on to the new story itself, which takes pride of place right at the front of the magazine. Square is changing its strategy of providing software only for Nintendo. We plan to supply several software titles in 1996 for the PlayStation. Among them, the most notable will be Final Fantasy VII, which should be out in Japan by Christmas of 96. While this may immediately mean little to UK gamers, it's a major coup for Sony. Squaresoft is the world's largest Nintendo licensee, bigger than Konami, Capcom or Acclaim in terms of units sold. No video game property other than Mario has sold as many cartridges. The Final Fantasy name has shifted 9.1 million units to date. Squaresoft shipped over 2.5 million units of Final Fantasy VI on day one. People queued for days beforehand, with lines of keen FF fans weaving through Tokyo's Akihabara district. And it's not just the Japanese who are addicted to Squaresoft's brand of adventure. Its RPGs regularly top the US charts for months at a time. Now, cartridges are a good thing. They're quick and painless, but they're also butt-clenchingly expensive to manufacture, which means that software houses have to pay huge sums of money to make them, and then charge the earth to generate any profit. The new N64 carts hold just 8 megabytes, or around 1/80th the information of a CD. Given the sprawling style of Square's role-playing titles, CD makes a lot of sense. An N64 cart costs $30 to manufacture, a PlayStation game costs less than $10. Now, I believe it was only recently that screenshots were released of what would have been the original N64 version of Final Fantasy VII. Now that Square doesn't have to worry about the restrictive sizes of Nintendo 64 cartridges, it's becoming obvious that it intends to hurl rendered images and cinematic cutscenes at Final Fantasy VII's 2 CDs, which later became 3. And even though the game's release is still the best part of 9 months away, and Square's switch to the PlayStation has only just been announced, the images recently released to the Japanese press make it look as if this was its intention all along. Providing that Square can keep its usual high standards of storytelling and character involvement, then come December the PlayStation might just have its biggest selling title to date. And some more news from 1996, Psygnosis, which then changed its name to Sony Interactive Entertainment, actually changed its name back to Psygnosis and reverted to a multi-platform publisher. The company's first step is to publish 4 titles on Sega's Saturn: Wipeout, Destruction Derby, Lemmings 3D and Discworld, all of which will be available during the first half of 1996. A little bit from the Japanese column now. Little time passes in Japan without a major exhibition or show setting gamers' pulses racing once again. In late February, the Amusement Operators Union show took place in the giant Makuhari Mess Trade Hall providing game heads with the chance to play the latest developments in the world of coin ops. Namco took this opportunity to preview its range of PlayStation-based arcade machines. Most jaw-dropping was Soul Edge. This new beat-em-up manages to knock Tekken and its sequel into a cocked hat, at least in terms of graphics. On to the previews now, starting with Die Hard Trilogy, which at the time was a really ambitious project featuring several different styles of gameplay. According to Mr. Provenzano, the executive director at Fox Interactive, Die Hard Trilogy is the first game that gives players a search and rescue mission, an arcade-style shooter, and a driving simulator, all in one title. Of course, multi-genre games tend to consist of several games which aren't good enough to work as standalone titles, but the guys at Fox seem adamant that this isn't the case with Die Hard. Well, only next month's review will tell you that. Back in May of '94, Japanese TV viewers tuned in to Telebe Asahi's midnight Channel 10 show Tonight, and instead of the usual review of Tokyo nightclubs, the audience was treated to sneak previews of the machine codenamed PSX. Admittedly, the demos on show were little more than pre-rendered sequences streamed from Silicon Graphics or other high-powered systems, but this was the first hint that PlayStation was onto something special, as a rabbit-shaped craft jumped high above a highly detailed cityscape. 14 months later, the finished title appeared in Japan under the banner of Jumping Flash. Jumping Flash 2 is ostensibly more of the same, but it does have several new features. For starters, the evil property developer, Baron Aloha, is the one in trouble and has called for Robit's help against the dastardly Captain Suzuki. Instead of collecting power-up carrots, Robit is now tasked with rescuing Aloha's Moo Moo minions, the pale three-legged creatures that hang around in bars. Many sequel games of this time usually had new features or gameplay elements, and this usually involved a character that couldn't swim before being able to swim in the new title. It seems Jumping Flash 2 followed suit in that regard. Does anyone know who Pete Sampras is? Apparently a tennis player? I certainly don't, but here we have a preview of Sampras Extreme. Codemasters prepares to unveil its smasher of a sports game endorsed by tennis supremo Pete Sampras. PSM takes a seat in centre court. To generate greater realism in all movement, Codemasters has employed their technique inverse kinematics, which means they can have 3D position rotation on the hand and shoulder, and because of the joint restrictions, you can only move the arm in a certain way, producing realistic and smooth motion. It's a simplified model of how the human joints work, interjects programmer Philip Hindle. For example, you can swing your arm around your head or spin your head like an owl, so effectively you're just restricting the joint movements. Developers such as Acclaim and Electronic Arts have their own motion capture studios, but Codemasters had to venture to France to find a company they felt happy to use, one which is currently working with Disney. This era of motion capture technology was covered in great depth as a main feature of the official PlayStation Magazine issue 4, which we covered last time. An interesting take on the scrolling shoot 'em up now. This is a preview of In the Hunt, where a lot of the action takes place underwater. A brace of gamers cooperate in their quest, which is replete with gun emplacements, subaquatic enemies, and shock surprise, end-of-level bosses. The graphics are fanatically detailed, with a lavish, almost East European styling, like those weird cartoons from Hungary. Much of the scenery is beautifully realised and animated, especially level 2, where entire buildings collapse into the sea. There's also a wealth of tiny detail, such as cars that overturn and scattering people, and all the action is accompanied by suitably oceanic bubbles and splashes. Of course, no self-respecting shooter would throw its face without a range of power-ups, and In the Hunt has a variety, albeit limited, of upgradable torpedoes, sea-to-air missiles, mines, and depth charges. The action is spread out over 6 shortish levels, each differently themed and regularly punctuated by animated boss creatures. In the Hunt will no doubt curry favour among the mindless blasting fans. Now on to the main feature of issue number 5. PSM asks, what makes a good video game? So much for a fad. With 20 years of experience of shooting aliens, climbing platforms, and saving the world at a moment's notice, are we any nearer to working out what separates the perennial shelf warmer from the software stuff of legend? With this being a time of incredible innovation in graphics technology, of course graphics was first on the list for PSM. The ever-increasing quality and realism of computer graphics has done much to attract older consumers to the games market, perhaps even to recapture those that lost interest back in the 8-bit days of the Spectrum and C64. It seems that part of the anorak stigma associated with video games comes from the fact that many adults lose their childhood imagination and find it hard to relate to chubby Italian plumbers or spiky blue hedgehogs. PlayStation has the power to bridge that gap in the imagination. And with the UK being obsessed with racing games at the time, and many of them topping the charts continually, speed is the second on the list. Crawl along at anything under 25 frames per second, and the player, particularly an adult one, will quickly lose a sense of immersion in this other world. After all, when you turn your head in the real world, there isn't a 3-second lag, and the real world doesn't jerk along as you move. Game speed is often referred to as frame rate, the rate at which the screen display is updated. Tekken, for instance, looks all the more realistic because the fighter's movements are updated every 60th of a second, resulting in very smooth animation and rapid response. FMVs, or full motion video, are kind of something that's been lost to time, really. The modern generation has found that this is typically a Japanese RPG thing to do, and not many other genres use FMVs really, apart from maybe the odd intro or outro sequence. But in the 90s, these were hugely big and important parts in pretty much every video game, although judging by this article, it wasn't well received by everyone. One advance in graphical technique that hasn't been welcomed with open arms is the inclusion of full motion video, which is often thought to be added at the expense of gameplay. It lurks in video games in one of two guises, either as the majority of the game engine, like Acclaim's remarkable D, or for sumptuous intro sequences, of which the finest proponent is Sony's Crazy Ivan. But while intros can help set the scene in a game, the problem is that once they've been watched once or twice, there's little pleasure in doing so again. Having been an avid fan of the PlayStation Final Fantasy games, I have to strongly disagree with that sentiment, but let's move on to sound. Sound is an often neglected part of software development, but good examples can go a long way towards enhancing the gameplay experience. Although the original soft rock guitar soundtracks for the PC version of Doom are well produced, they do little to enhance one of the most terrifying worlds ever created in a video game. Compare that to the specially composed PlayStation themes, and the difference is startling. More recently, sports games have started to feature famous commentators to give the gamer the complete televisual experience, and Sony's soon-to-be F1 racing game sees Murray Walker lending his dulcet tones. Certainly the future will see sound taking a more progressive role in games. Overall, PSM's opinions seem pretty dated on this matter, to be honest. Marketing and licensing deals are two other big sections in here, and I think by now most of us just wish they didn't really exist in the gaming world. Perhaps the most interesting sections are the interviews with different developers about what makes a game great.
The making of a good game is a complex and slightly mysterious business, as there are just so many factors. Presentation. It's not enough for a game merely to look good, it must be easy and satisfying to use in a way which allows as much complexity as the game needs. Sound. SFX must be appropriate to the overall game and the immediate situation, or they will jar. Music should complement the action or pace of a game. Games can be enhanced by the right combination of music and sound effects. Poor use of sound can ruin even a good game. Concept. It isn't necessary to come up with a new idea for every game, but a fresh outlook. A tight hold on gameplay and attention to detail will lift a game above its competitors. Personal preference. Staying with one or two genres that you've always liked can be limiting. It can mean restricting yourself to mediocre shoot 'em ups, for example, rather than experimenting with a top-class strategy or adventure game.
The perfect game with a faultless gameplay will never be written. Gameplay is a matter of taste and preference. Everyone has their own ideals in a game. To make a classic in terms of gameplay takes a rare and subtle blend of ingredients that every game developer strives towards and very few achieve. The general formula would probably tend toward an addictiveness that says, just one more go, a balance between challenge and frustration and the reward of competition, be it against the clock, other players, or the world in general. To us, the best game developers are those who obviously like games, the Bullfrogs and Jeff Crammons. The creative and playability influence comes from the programmers, artists and musicians, not just the game designers. No one can teach you how to inject gameplay. It's a matter of trying things out and listening to the response.
On to the reader letters now, and Sam McGuinness from West Molesey is back for another stab.
Mortal Kombat 3 Fluid. After playing your demo CD, I can safely say this isn't true. In the recommendation box in issue 3 you said the animation is realistically fluid. Surely after looking at Tekken and its brilliant motion captured animation, you would have noticed the PlayStation standards are much higher than Mortal Kombat 3's mediocre attempt. It's not a bad game, but realistically fluid,
Tom Bulwer from Belgium brings up a debate that is still raging today in the retro community.
I'm writing about the difference between PAL and NTSC outputs on the screen. Steve Malpas, feedback PSM3, says that the Japanese or NTSC output is far better than that on the Euro or PAL version. Why are people in your mag so crazy about £2,000 widescreen televisions like the Sony Trinitron? They give an output far wider than the tweaked PAL games. I own a PAL PlayStation and I have Jump in Flash and Ridge Racer. I can see a minute difference, but it doesn't alter the gameplay. The thing that isn't so good about the NTSC version is the speed. Toshinden 2 and Street Fighter Zero in NTSC are so much faster than the PAL version will ever be. So if Mr. Malpas is going to worry about the difference between PAL and NTSC, it should be about speed, not about being a letterbox screen display.
PSM replies, the old NTSC versus PAL debate, yes. NTSC is generally faster. Yes, PAL screens are slightly squashed. However, there is very little we can do about it. The PSM team have PAL machines at home and are quite happy with them. It's only when you have a PAL machine next to an NTSC one that you really notice the difference. But since most people haven't even seen an NTSC machine, it's sort of a moot point. Another feature now, this one all about multiplayer gaming, and back in the 90s, as you can see, this was done with multiple people in the same room, often even with multiple consoles and TVs in the same room, though it was a lot harder to move the TVs around, unfortunately, back then because they were heavy as hell. Peter Molyneux, a British developer known mainly for creating single-player games, chimes in, "However well you craft a computer game, there's nothing like playing against a human player. For me personally, multiplayer games are the ultimate experience." Psygnosis was the first company to utilise the PlayStation's multiplayer options with link-up versions of Wipeout and Destruction Derby. Later titles Assault Rigs and Crazy Ivan also support head-to-head modes. "We realise people won't necessarily want to take their PlayStation and TV round to a friend's house," concedes Glenn O'Connell, Psygnosis PR and marketing manager, "but it's the first time anybody has given the consumer a real coin-op setup in the home. You just have to look at the quality of games linked up and you'd swear you were in an arcade." A number of games allow players to compete simultaneously using 2 controllers and 1 machine. This is the most common form of multiplayer gaming with the PlayStation, and wouldn't be possible without it. I've just read that sentence about 5 times. I don't think that's true at all. I don't know why they've written that, but obviously we had consoles before the PlayStation that used multiple controllers at the same time. On to the reviews now, starting with a real cult classic and fan favourite of the PS1 era, it's Alien Trilogy. The time has come for the long-awaited Alien trilogy to enter the dimly lit corridor and brown trouser us. In the game, you stalk, kill, open doors, discover secret areas by blasting thin walls, upgrade your arsenal and earn your spurs. One significant difference between this and Doom is that Trilogy has a motion sensor and little white dots appear on it which tell you something bad is about to attack you. And it serves to heighten the tension, particularly if the foe is a facehugger, horrible little creatures which jump on your yes, you're ahead of us. These little beggars scamper along ventilation shafts, so a little white dot might be right next to you on the scanner, but you can't actually see the blighter. It's one of the most satisfying things in the world to unload a shotgun into one of them, particularly if they're flying towards your face. They explode, emitting horrible acidy green stuff, but when they land on your face, you can't help but turn away from the screen. For heaven's sake man, it's a Doom beater, you cry? Alien Trilogy is a different game, simple as that. More pensive, yet certainly atmospheric. Scary too. It doesn't quite have the howling intensity of Doom, but you cannot fail to enjoy the graphical variety, the change of weaponry, and assortment of foe. Inevitably, there will be periods when you're strolling the corridors with not a clue where to turn, and there will be times when you see a dot on the scanner approaching fast, and you just turn and flee in the opposite direction. Alien Trilogy gets an 8 out of 10 from PSM. Only today I was in my local retro game shop and a young kid was talking about the new Need for Speed that's coming out. Well, this is the original Need for Speed. We wave spaceships away with a dismissive hand. The PlayStation has been crying out for a traditional car racing game, but do we feel Need for Speed? I really don't know what they mean by traditional car racing game. The PlayStation certainly wasn't crying out for racing games in general, I don't think. Next up we have a 2D fighter emerging in the sea of 3D fighters that were on the PlayStation. Capcom brings Street Fighter Alpha. Street Fighter Alpha was a game that added many new characters to the series, with Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li and M. Bison being the only series staple characters in the game. While on the face of it, Alpha seems uncomfortably similar to former Street Fighter 2 titles. This is truly a case of there being more than meets the eye, and you could conceivably spend hours, days even, uncovering every move and exploring each of its myriad gameplay twists. After repeated play, it becomes crystal clear that as lauded as games such as Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate, Killer Instinct 2 and King of Fighters 96 are, they are mere Lilliputians scuttling around the feet of the Gulliver that is Capcom. Alpha is so comprehensively playable that you simply don't care that it lacks the graphical extravagance of Rare's effort. It is simply playability incarnate. 8 out of 10. Core Design's Shell Shock, which is an arcadey tank driving shoot 'em up, gets a 7 out of 10. In essence, it has to be said that Shell Shock is a complete blast. However, we do deliberate whether its repetitive nature may detract from the initial intensity and frenetic activity that the game commands. But credit where credit's due, this is by no means an easy game. Even with the aid of the biggest 240mm M257 smooth bore cannon, 60mm M231 pivoting chain gun and Viper SAMs in the known universe. Primal Rage, which of course had already been on several other platforms including the 3DO, PC, Mega Drive, Sega 32X and SNES, gets a surprising 5 out of 10. Reading through this review, it seems that the reviewer just found dinosaurs fighting a bit boring for his tastes, and that seems to be the main issue they have with Primal Rage. It's a 2D beat 'em up with clever stop motion animation, 7 beasts and a few moves, but you can't hide the fact that dinosaurs fighting isn't really very interesting. One imagines that had the game appeared on the SNES in 1992, people would have wet their pants over it, but it just all seems rather stodgy. Sure, it's got plenty of nice growls and roars, and it's got tournaments, tugs of wars, 15 difficulty levels. It has all of these things, but equally, if you've got Tekken, WWF WrestleMania or Mortal Kombat 3, you'd have to think dinosaurs cooler than Homer Simpson to go out and buy this. Very harsh indeed. A strategic shoot 'em up next, Bullfrog's Magic Carpet. It's a very unusual game, as this review starts off. You fly around a mythical universe on a wizardous rug collecting mana, which hot air balloons carry back to your fortress for safekeeping. You collect the said conjurations by unleashing potent fireballs at worms, bees, birds, arrowmen, fighting skeletons, sea monsters, and rival carpetbaggers, and many more. This is a game you will not immediately recognise. It is a shoot 'em up, but with real strategic elements. Some may find the concept rather disconcerting, others may not have the patience to reap the rewards that Magic Carpet has to offer, but there isn't another game like it, and despite the constant juggling of resources, the infuriating number of things you need to concentrate on, the sheer weight and scale of Dastardly Foe, and the somewhat vague gameplay direction, Magic Carpet is original, beautiful, and endearing. 8 out of 10. Apparently long awaited back in the 90s, Wing Commander 3 gets a 6 out of 10. You play the part of Colonel Christopher Blair, played by Mark Hamill, a veteran pilot posted to the beleaguered TCS Victory. From here you set out to save humanity by demonstrating that you're generally a bit of a god in the cockpit, and someone other than Darth Vader's son out of it. Essentially, the Victory is your headquarters. It's the place you return to after sorties, so as to view the current news on the war, save your game, change the options, chat to various members of the crew for feedback, and get the all-important brief of the next hazardous mission. The digitised sprites sit nicely in their computer-generated backgrounds, and as a whole, the HQ facet of the game is absorbing and entertaining. However, it's once you get out into the vacuum that things turn pear-shaped. Despite the advance of time and technology, this aspect of the game seems to have been caught up in some kind of temporal anomaly, with little differing from the saga's early days. This includes the quality of the graphics, which might have been jaw-dropping for the ST, but which are merely functional today. The collision detection seems wrong too. There isn't really any sense of depth. The craft are either specks in the distance or right on top of you, with minimal jerky scaling in between, so judging distance can be exasperating. This isn't a problem with homing missiles in the equation, but when it's plain old lasers and tachyon cannons, targeting enemies can become tedious. Wing 3's creators seem to have wanted to make a first-class movie, and that's exactly what they've done, only it's the talents of Hamill and McDowell which doubtless consumed a large part of the game's $6 million budget, leaving precious little for the game itself. World Cup Golf, it's obviously not Tiger Woods 2004, so we don't really care about that, do we? And for the final feature, this month's Top Secret dedicates both of its pages to hints and passwords for the PS1 version of Doom. And that wraps up another episode. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jake of theretroperspective.com, and if you want to see more of the official PlayStation magazine, please subscribe.